It only took one smirk. As Marcus Dwyer leaned forward in his chair, his signature grin curling with sarcasm, millions of viewers across America leaned in too. But for a very different reason. He thought he had her cornered. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, just 27 years old, was about to be tested in front of a live audience. And not just any audience, this was the evening hour hosted by one of the most relentless critics of Trump's America. But what happened next didn't just silence a studio. It sent shockwaves across the nation. In just under 60 seconds, a verbal firefight erupted that would light up social media dinner tables and newsrooms coast to coast. It began with Dwyer's jab. Does working for Donald Trump ever feel like babysitting someone who refuses to grow up? Laughter erupted. Cameras panned to smirking audience members, a few nodding in smug approval. But Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Instead, with a calm smile and a fire in her eyes, she replied, "No, Marcus. I work for the greatest president in modern history. He's saving this country. I'm just here to make sure the truth gets heard, no filter, no spin." And just like that, the crowd's energy shifted. You could feel it. A mix of cheers and gasps rippled through the audience as if someone had pulled the emergency brake on the usual liberal narrative. Dwyer blinked just for a moment, but it was enough. From that moment forward, this wasn't just an interview. It was a cultural collision, old media versus new, boomers versus Gen Z, authority versus audacity. Clips of that opening exchange exploded online. Hashtags like #CarolineFires back and #Gen Z vests old media surged to the top of X, formerly Twitter. YouTube shorts racked up millions of views within hours. People weren't just watching, they were feeling. The anger, the pride, the shock, the admiration. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about someone finally having the guts to stare down the Hollywood stage lights and say what millions at home had been thinking for years. This was real. This was raw. And for many Americans over 65, who'd spent a lifetime watching slick hosts talk down to anyone who dared think differently, this moment hit like thunder. From that first explosive exchange, viewers across the country knew this wasn't going to be a normal late-night sit-down. But to understand the full weight of what had just happened, you had to know who Karoline Leavitt was and why her face-off with Marcus Dwyer mattered more than any talk show segment in recent memory. At just 27, Karoline wasn't just the youngest White House press secretary in American history. She was a bold voice of a new generation, Gen Z conservative, unapologetically loyal to Donald Trump and completely unafraid to challenge the status quo. Her press briefings weren't just updates, they were firestorms going viral on TikTok, X, and YouTube within minutes. With over 700,000 followers and a loyal base of young voters, she wasn't just representing a president, she was shaping the voice of an entire political movement. And that movement had found itself under fire. President Trump, now in his second term, was being criticized more fiercely than ever. From controversial tariffs on Canada to cutting major media outlets like AP and Reuters from cabinet briefings, the administration faced daily backlash. But Karoline didn't back down. She stood on that press podium like a lightning rod, deflecting, redirecting, and when necessary, striking back with force. That's why she was there on the evening hour. That's why Marcus Dwyer, known for dismantling guests with biting wit and smug smiles, had called her out by name, vowing to expose her on national television. For decades, Dwyer had been the voice of progressive America, clever, sharp-tongued, a media darling who took down senators, CEOs, even past presidents. His studio in Manhattan had seen dozens of political careers falter under the weight of his satire. But Karoline wasn't just another guest. She was the face of a rising tide, a Gen Z movement that didn't trust the legacy. Media didn't apologize for supporting Trump, and certainly wasn't afraid of a studio audience filled with laughter and liberal applause. This wasn't just a battle of talking points. It was generational warfare playing out in front of millions. Dwyer's producers had teased the segment for days, promising fireworks. And when Karoline arrived dressed in Gen Z cool with an oversized blazer and crisp white sneakers, she brought more than just attitude. She brought receipts, and fire, and calm, and a strategic mind that caught even the most seasoned host off guard. In the span of a few minutes, what began as a routine appearance turned into a political flashpoint. The country wasn't just watching, it was choosing sides. And Karoline, she was just getting started. The air in the studio was thick before the first punchline even landed. Marcus Dwyer, perched behind his gleaming mahogany desk under theatrical lights, narrowed his eyes and smirked. The audience leaned forward, sensing a jab was coming. And it did. So Dwyer said with that signature smug grin, "What's it like babysitting a president who refuses to grow up?" The crowd erupted, half with laughter, half with audible gasps. It was the kind of line Marcus was known for, fast, stinging, and wrapped in a bow of sarcasm. But Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, the lights catching the edge of her white blazer, and with the calm confidence of a seasoned general, she delivered a blow of her own. "I don't babysit anyone," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I work with the GOAT, the greatest of all time. He's saving America, and I'm here to make sure that truth reaches the people." The room split right down the middle. One half of the audience burst into applause, a few standing. The other half jeered, shaking their heads and scoffing. But Karoline's expression didn't change. She was unfazed, unshaken, and undeniably in control. This wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a battle of ideologies. On one side, the old guard liberal media represented by Marcus Dwyer, whose late-night legacy was built on mocking anyone tied to the right. On the other side, Karoline, a Gen Z powerhouse fluent in social media memes and direct communication with the American public without needing a filter. Dwyer leaned in clearly, not expecting her to fire back so quickly. "GOAT," he repeated with a skeptical grin. "You mean the man who renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? That's the guy you think is saving America?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "He's bold, he's brave, and he's not afraid to rewrite the script if the old one's broken. You might mock him, Marcus, but millions of Americans see results, jobs, strength, peace, and they trust that more than a punchline." Again, the audience split. Some clapped slowly, defiantly. Others booed louder, creating a tension so thick you could feel it through the screen. Behind the scenes, producers were exchanging frantic glances. This was more than ratings gold. This was a culture clash playing out in real-time, vintage network satire against the raw, viral power of Gen Z's digital voice. Dwyer tried to retake the ground. "Karoline, you have style. I'll give you that," he said, motioning to her sneakers and minimalist Gen Z aesthetic. "But style doesn't make substance. Aren't you just using your youth and charm to distract from the chaos your administration causes?" Karoline's smile grew colder. "Style isn't what gets 728,000 people to follow you because they believe in something real," she said. "They follow because I speak directly, no filters, no media twisting my words. Just truth. That scares your world, Marcus, but mine. We thrive on it." At that moment, the battle lines were clear. Dwyer's jabs, once reliable applause-getters, now met with mixed results. Karoline's comebacks were sharp, personal, and potent, aimed not just at her host, but at the entire establishment he represented. This wasn't just banter. This was a generational war unfolding live. And Karoline Leavitt wasn't just holding her ground, she was gaining it. The tension had reached a simmering boil by the time Marcus Dwyer leaned in with narrowed eyes and a sharp tongue. "Karoline," he said, voice steady but laced with accusation. "Last month your administration banned AP and Reuters from cabinet meetings. Tell me, is that how freedom of the press works now? You silence the ones who ask tough questions." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward eagerly, sensing Dwyer's attempt to land a knockout blow. But Karoline didn't blink. She simply crossed her legs, straightened her posture, and met his stare head-on. The air inside the studio thickened, less like a comedy show, more like a courtroom. With a calm yet assertive tone, she responded, "We're not silencing anyone, Marcus. We're filtering out propaganda. There's a difference. Freedom of the press isn't the freedom to lie unchecked. This administration is committed to the truth, whether or not that makes the old media uncomfortable." The crowd stirred. A few clapped, others booed. Dwyer smiled faintly, like a chess player setting up his next move. "So it's not censorship, it's—" "What quality control?" he asked, mocking the phrase with raised brows. "Sounds like spin to me." Karoline leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "No, it's not spin. It's accountability. Let's be honest, Americans don't trust the media the way they used to. And why would they? When outlets cherry-pick facts and craft narratives to fit an agenda, they lose their place as neutral watchdogs. We're doing what they won't, telling it straight." Then came the moment no one expected. Karoline turned slightly toward the audience, her voice clear as a bell. "Have you ever heard of trust, Marcus? We're rebuilding it. And we're doing it without you." A gasp swept the room. Cameras zoomed in. Even the band at the edge of the stage stopped tuning. Marcus Dwyer sat back slightly, his expression faltering for the first time all night. The tables had turned, and Karoline wasn't just defending her administration, she was indicting the media itself. The studio transformed. Gone was the relaxed late-night banter. In its place, a palpable courtroom atmosphere where every word carried weight. Older viewers watching from home likely felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like watching a Watergate hearing in prime time, only this time the roles were reversed. Karoline wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every American tired of spin, of being told what to think. Her message resonated across party lines, not as a press secretary, but as a daughter of a working-class family. A mother and a young voice refusing to be talked down to. This wasn't a skit. This wasn't satire. This was a showdown for the soul of public discourse. And Karoline Leavitt, armed with conviction and clarity, was winning. Marcus Dwyer wasn't ready to back down. With the audience still buzzing from Karoline's sharp rebuke on press integrity, he leaned in again, a sly grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You talk a lot about truth, Karoline. But forgive me if I find it hard to take seriously when half your communication happens on TikTok. Isn't that the app for dance videos and dog filters? Since when did that become a place for policy?" Laughter erupted from one side of the studio, predictable and a bit smug. But Karoline didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled, calm, confident, and completely unfazed. Her reply cut through the noise like a laser. "Marcus," she said, "I have 728,000 followers on TikTok. Not because I dance, not because I act, but because I'm real. Americans, especially young Americans, are done with old media games. They want connection, not condescension. You call yourself the gatekeeper of truth, but the gates rusted shut." I walked right past it. Gasps, then cheers, then more boos. She pressed on, her voice rising not in anger, but with a force of conviction that could shake glass. "You think TikTok is shallow? Try ignoring the people who live paycheck to paycheck, who don't watch late-night TV because they're working the night shift. I grew up in a middle-class family in New Hampshire. My dad sold used trucks. My mom worked 2 jobs just to make Christmas special. We didn't have privilege, we had grit. And that grit is what I bring to the White House every single day." The audience grew still. Even Marcus Dwyer, whose smirk had served him well for decades, looked momentarily disarmed. Karoline continued, softer now, but no less firm. "You call TikTok a joke. But I've used it to explain policies, defend veterans, and highlight small-town heroes. It's not the platform, it's the message. And when you speak truthfully, Americans listen whether it's from a podium or a phone screen. Her words landed with weight. Not just on the crowd in the studio, but on the millions of viewers at home, many of whom had grandchildren on TikTok and suddenly saw it in a different light. This was no longer just a generational divide. It was a cultural reckoning. The old media playbook of sarcasm and spectacle was meeting something it couldn't mock into silence authenticity. Karoline wasn't playing to win applause. She was speaking from lived experience. And for anyone watching, whether in a recliner in Indiana or a kitchen in Florida, it felt personal, familiar, powerful, because when a young woman who grew up on grit says, "I didn't inherit this voice, I earned it," even the loudest critic has to pause. And Marcus Dwyer did. Just for a beat. The energy in the studio had shifted. Karoline's words about grit and growing up in small-town New Hampshire were still hanging in the air like dust after a storm. But Marcus Dwyer wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Leaning forward, his voice dropped an octave, his smile vanishing. He had one final card to play. "You talk a lot about grit, about authenticity," he said, the edge in his tone unmistakable. "But at the end of the day, Karoline, aren't you just a puppet? A young face, smart, articulate, sure, but still just the soft-spoken shield for Trump's failures. You defend him because that's your job. You don't challenge him. You hide him. Admit it." The words hit like a slap across the face. The crowd gasped, some cheered, others jeered, but Karoline didn't flinch. For the first time, she went completely still. The silence was deafening. Even the stage lights seemed to dim as every eye focused on her. And then she moved. Karoline leaned forward, slow and deliberate. Her voice, when it came, was low, not in volume, but in gravity. "You think I'm hiding him?" she said, her jaw-tight eyes locked on Marcus. "You think I stand here to cover for a man I don't believe in?" She stood up, not to storm out, but to own the moment. "I'm not a puppet. I chose this path. I fought for it. I earned it. And I'm not here to hide anything, I'm here to protect what's been built. Peace. Jobs. Strength. Call it what you want. But I call it progress. And I will defend it with my own voice, not someone else's script." The room went still again. Then applause, loud, sharp, and defiant, rose from one side of the audience. People stood clapping not just for her words, but for what they represented: conviction. Resolve. A young woman refusing to be silenced. Karoline's voice didn't shake. "I'm not a media-trained echo. I'm a mother. I'm a fighter. I'm a product of every small town that built this country. You don't have to like me. But don't you ever mistake me for someone who can be controlled." The other half of the audience sat frozen, speechless, not in disagreement, but in disbelief. This wasn't political theater anymore. It was a full-on generational reckoning, and Karoline Leavitt had just delivered the blow no one saw coming. Above her, the screen flashed the hashtag Karoline Strikes Back. Backstage producers were wide-eyed. Online, the clip was already circulating, shared, posted, and debated. And in that moment, Karoline didn't just win the argument. She became the story. The clock was ticking down, but Marcus Dwyer wasn't ready to back off. With a steely look and a voice laced with accusation, he leaned in for what he clearly thought would be the final blow. "Karoline," he said, pausing for emphasis, "you talk about leadership, motherhood, loyalty, but let's call it what it is. You're selling out your entire generation just to hold on to power." A hush fell over the studio. Even the cameramen seemed to pause. It was a line meant to wound deeply personally. But Karoline didn't flinch. Not this time. She stood tall, her white sneakers planted firmly on the studio floor, her eyes locked on Dwyer's with quiet fire. "You think I'm selling out Gen Z?" she asked, her voice low but resonating with conviction. "I'm a mother. I have a son who's going to grow up in the world we're shaping right now. And let me tell you something, this isn't about power. It's about responsibility. Her tone sharpened like a blade. You cling to the past, Marcus. You sit in that chair mocking, spinning, laughing because it's safe. It's familiar. But I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to shape what comes next. The audience held its collective breath. Karoline's voice rose, each word deliberate. This country doesn't need another millionaire in a suit giving lectures from an ivory tower. It needs truth. It needs courage. And it needs someone who's not afraid to stand up no matter the cost. That's why I'm here. Not to sell out my generation, but to lead it. And with that, she stepped back, arms crossed. Her expression calm, but her presence undeniable. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, whistles. It wasn't just a reaction. It was release. The entire studio burst into noise, the kind that shakes walls and trends online. Across the country, phones lit up. The hashtag Karoline Strikes Back was replaced in real time by a new one. Hashtag Gen Z Leads Now. Backstage producers scrambled to capture the moment. On Twitter, YouTube, and X, the clip of Karoline's takedown was already being called the moment that changed political television. Commentators from both sides couldn't deny it, something had shifted. And then came the narrator's voice, cool and composed. Marcus Dwyer came into that interview, ready to corner Karoline Leavitt. But he didn't walk out with a win. He walked out realizing America had just witnessed something different. A new kind of leadership. As the lights dimmed and the audience slowly filtered out, Karoline walked off stage, not as a guest, not as a spin doctor, but as the voice of a rising generation. A mother, a fighter, a force to be reckoned with. And the nation was still watching. The clock was ticking down, but Marcus Dwyer wasn't ready to back off. With a steely look and a voice laced with accusation, he leaned in for what he clearly thought would be the final blow. "Karoline," he said, pausing for emphasis, "you talk about leadership, motherhood, loyalty, but let's call it what it is. You're selling out your entire generation just to hold on to power." A hush fell over the studio. Even the cameramen seemed to pause. It was a line meant to wound deeply personally. But Karoline didn't flinch. Not this time. She stood tall, her white sneakers planted firmly on the studio floor, her eyes locked on Dwyer's with quiet fire. "You think I'm selling out Gen Z?" she asked, her voice low, but resonating with conviction. "I'm a mother. I have a son who's going to grow up in the world we're shaping right now. And let me tell you something, this isn't about power. It's about responsibility." Her tone sharpened like a blade. "You cling to the past, Marcus. You sit in that chair mocking, spinning, laughing because it's safe. It's familiar. But I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to shape what comes next." The audience held its collective breath. Karoline's voice rose, each word deliberate. "This country doesn't need another millionaire in a suit giving lectures from an ivory tower. It needs truth. It needs courage. And it needs someone who's not afraid to stand up no matter the cost. That's why I'm here. Not to sell out my generation, but to lead it." And with that, she stepped back, arms crossed. Her expression calm, but her presence undeniable. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, whistles. It wasn't just a reaction. It was release. The entire studio burst into noise, the kind that shakes walls and trends online. Across the country, phones lit up. The hashtag Karoline Strikes Back was replaced in real time by a new one. Gen Z Leads Now. Backstage producers scrambled to capture the moment. On Twitter, YouTube, and X, the clip of Karoline's takedown was already being called the moment that changed political television. Commentators from both sides couldn't deny it, something had shifted. And then came the narrator's voice, cool and composed. Marcus Dwyer came into that interview, ready to corner Karoline Leavitt. But he didn't walk out with a win. He walked out realizing America had just witnessed something different. A new kind of leadership. As the lights dimmed and the audience slowly filtered out, Karoline walked off stage not as a guest, not as a spin doctor, but as the voice of a rising generation. A mother, a fighter, a force to be reckoned with. And the nation was still watching. Backstage, under the soft glow of the dressing room mirror, Karoline Leavitt finally let out a breath. Her phone buzzed in her hand, messages pouring in notifications flooding the screen. But there was one post she had already typed, ready to go. With a slight smile, she tapped Post. It simply read, #vibe check for Dwyer. Gen Z doesn't flinch. And just like that, the internet erupted again. But beyond the hashtags and applause, something deeper lingered. A narrator's voice faded in steady and thoughtful. This wasn't just a clash between left and right. It wasn't just a battle between Marcus Dwyer's old-school satire and Karoline's Gen Z fire. This was a war between control and authenticity, between the polished performance and the unfiltered truth. In those 27 electrifying minutes, something shifted. America saw not just a political figure, but a generational voice refusing to be boxed in. Karoline didn't just defend herself. She turned the very platform that was meant to discredit her into a springboard for conviction. While some viewers at home shook their heads, others stood and clapped in their living rooms. A veteran in Florida messaged his grandson. She stood tall even when the room turned cold. A retired school teacher in Ohio wrote in the comments, "I may not agree with her politics, but I admire her courage." That was real. The question that echoed wasn't just about politics, it was personal. Would you hold your ground, like Karoline did, in a world of noise, division, and constant labeling? Do we pause to understand, or are we too quick to judge? Karoline's confrontation on live television reminded everyone, especially those who lived through the civil rights movement, the Vietnam-era Watergate, that truth isn't always wrapped in the packaging we expect. Sometimes it comes from the young in sneakers with fire in their voice, and sometimes it rattles us because it's honest. The narrator continued softly but firmly. Karoline didn't just survive the late-night ambush. She changed the temperature of the room. She didn't ask for permission to speak. She made herself heard. And in doing so, she reminded America of something we often forget, that strength isn't about shouting louder. It's about standing taller. As the final moments of the broadcast drew near, the camera caught one last image: Karoline walking down the hall, head high, her reflection visible in the glass. Not defiant, determined, not angry, anchored. And in that image, viewers saw more than just a political figure. They saw a new kind of leadership, one born from conviction, sharpened by criticism, and grounded in purpose. Karoline Leavitt stepped down from the stage, her posture unshaken, her gaze forward. Every step echoed with confidence. Behind her, Marcus Dwyer, the once dominant host, remained seated, speechless. His trademark smirk was gone, replaced by stunned silence. What was meant to be a takedown had become a turning point. This wasn't just another late-night interview. It was a battle of values, generations, and truth. And Karoline didn't just survive, she owned the moment. Now the focus shifts to the audience. If her words moved you, if her stance inspired you, this is your moment to respond. Like this video, if you believe courage still matters in America. Share it with a friend who's tired of media games and ready to hear real voices. Comment your favorite moment, the line that gave you chills, or the truth you've been waiting to hear. And subscribe, because this channel is more than political talk. It's a place for clarity, conviction, and stories that resonate. This is where America speaks. The final scenes replay Karoline's unwavering defiance, the studio's explosive applause, and Marcus Dwyer left speechless. Then Karoline's final line echoes one last time: "I do this for my son, for the future." You cling to the past. We shape what's next. This moment wasn't the end. It was a spark. So don't just watch, join the movement. Because the truth doesn't shout. It stands tall. And Karoline Leavitt just proved truth still wins.